Hello, this is Deborah with Redirecting, and I'm going to be talking about the president of Russia and some very interesting words he had to say about Africa. First of all, thank you to Sister Denise for sharing this story with us. We are going to be getting into this. The article is actually on howafrica.com. But anyway, it's titled Russian President Vladimir Putin allegedly says that Africa is a cemetery for Africans. Now, let me read the article so you can get a better understanding of what he is talking about. It says Russian President Vladimir Putin has once again given Africans a reality check after he was quoted saying that the continent was like a graveyard for its people. According to a viral post, Putin is alleged to have heavily questioned the ways of the common African man. He says that when an African becomes rich, his bank accounts are in Switzerland. He travels to France for medical treatment. He invests in Germany. He buys from Dubai. He consumes Chinese. He prays in Rome or Mecca. His children study in Europe. He travels to Canada, USA, Europe for tourism. If he dies, he will be buried in his native country of Africa. Africa is just a cemetery for Africans. How can a cemetery be developed? Putin remarks have had Africans all over the continent talking, with some taking it as positive criticism, while others felt it was a personal attack from the tough Russian president. Well, family, I'm going to take a very unique turn on this one. I agree with what Russian President Vladimir Putin is saying. I agree with what he's saying. There is nothing to dispute here. I can certainly see why some would see it as criticism. Okay, I certainly see that. But I can also see how some see it as positive criticism versus a personal attack. Okay, this is positive criticism. Basically, if I can just add my 2 cents, it sounds as if he's saying anyone with money, any African with money and success does all of their business abroad. Their travels, their bank accounts, their medical treatment, their purchases, whatever they consumed, their investments, even their prayers. Now, that necessarily isn't all true, okay? Unless he's saying the fact that you are either a Muslim or a Christian. If he's saying it in those terms, then your prayers are directed in that regard. But the prayer itself happens on the ground, okay, in Africa. But it sounds like that's what he's saying, that there are so many Christians and so many Muslims in Africa that even your religion is attributed outside of Africa, because those were not religions of our people originally, okay? Many of our people, I'm going to say the people of Africa had 2 different directions they were going. Those of the house of Shem were Israelites, or are Israelites, and of course the Hamites, they had many deities and many gods, okay? So basically we were not Christians or Muslims historically. But again, back to his statements about African people and how they live when they are rich versus how they live when they're just a common man. The common man, for him, his burial is in Africa. For even those who do everything abroad, is saying that when it's time for them to be buried, that's when they go back home to be buried in their home or native land in Africa. And so for some, the immediate response would be, oh, what is he trying to say here? Is this a personal attack? But when you really listen to what he's saying, it is not an attack at all. It is him basically saying that you don't have any confidence in your own land, your own doctors, your own wealth, in which a lot of Africans know that the land is very wealthy. very rich and prosperous, but they themselves are not partaking of the wealth of Africa. And this is why many feel the need to go outside of Africa to get any type of wealth or education or experience or anything of that nature, but they go back to Africa to die. Now, I did want to say this. I said this in a previous video, but I thought it was very interesting that the ambassador of the AU, the U.S. ambassador of the AU. She is an African woman who lives between 2 and 3 hours away from us right now here in America. She lives in Tennessee. And so we could literally drive to her house in less than 3 hours. I find it very interesting that she doesn't live on the continent. Her success is here in the U.S., less than 3 hours away from where we live right now. And also very interesting that she herself lives in a former slave plantation home where a lot of our people were mistreated and abused. She actually owns a former slave plantation. Because she wasn't born here, that may not be one of her biggest concerns, but for many of us, we would probably have issue living in a home like that. I remember looking at the styles of the home and liking how the homes were made, but then when I realized what they were, at the time I didn't realize what they were, you know. But now that I know I couldn't live in one that was actually a home that the slave owner had slaves on the land and on the property. I would have a hard time with that. I can almost get a sense that we would feel the presence of our ancestors there during their suffering. And I think we feel that anyway being in this land, because it was all over this land, but specifically being in a home that was owned by slave masters who lived there, did all kinds of deeds in those homes, on that land, on that property. I can imagine that the presence of spirits would be very, very high. But I just thought, for those of you who didn't know that, the U.S. ambassador to the AU, which is an African woman, she actually lives in Tennessee. And so what Vladimir Putin, back to what he was saying, he was basically saying, just as the doctor, many of them don't stay in Africa. They do all of their business and live all of their wealthy lifestyles outside of Africa, except the leaders, of course, okay, and those who can afford to actually dwell there in the land. But the leaders who get the kickbacks from these foreign leaders, of course, it's very easy for them to live in Africa. They have billions of dollars. Like the ambassador said, she said, don't pay attention to the African leaders who may have gotten a $1 billion bribe. Pay attention to the one who has the $20 billion. And from my perspective, I think the one that gets the $1 billion is the one you need to pay attention to, because those outsiders don't have to come in there and do that. It shows that the leaders are the ones that are wicked, because they are the ones selling out the people for the $1 billion while they are protected by the armies, and they are the ones who are benefiting from the wealth that is distributed to them from these foreigners. And so I doubt very seriously if I can only look at the French and the Dutch and all of these people who come in and hand them money, or the Chinese, and not look at him too. The African leader, in my opinion, and I know how the Most High views it, he is the one to blame, because they are the head. They are the leaders. And if the head is sick, the whole body is sick. And so it is really interesting. I know I kind of went off into something else, but to me it all ties in, because this is pretty much what Vladimir Putin is trying to say in this post that went viral. He's basically saying that the ways of the common African man are just simply to die there in the land. But those who consume and buy and dwell and travel and reap all of the benefits of everything outside of Africa, because they have money, when it's time to die, Their bodies are returned home at that point, and Africa becomes their cemetery. I thought also it was interesting that he said, how can a cemetery be developed? Something very deep in that statement too. How can a cemetery be developed? He's basically saying that this is a land of death for most of the people of Africa. And so because it is a land of death, most of the people live and die there without ever rising above even the minutest of the poverty level. Most of the people live in such a way that it should bring tears to your eyes to even see. And so I definitely see it as positive criticism, as some are taking it. I don't see it as a personal attack, although I'm not saying that the man has any love for Africa or its people. I know that's not a position of love he's speaking from. He's speaking from reality. He's just basically stating it as it is. Okay, family, that is all on that subject, and thank you for listening. And with that, I will say shalom. Be sure to ring the bell to be notified of new uploads on this channel, and also comment, share, like, and subscribe.